That they give you in church planting are not the markers that you can apply to the urban context.
Wow.
Are you saying that one of the markers isn't that your shirt smells like alcohol?
Absolutely, right?
You got tears on your Sunday morning. That should be a marker.
I just want to say welcome to Common Ground Church and Community. I am Pastor John Perkins, lead pastor of Common Ground Covenant Church in Jackson, Mississippi. And I have the wonderful opportunity to be here with my friends. Although this is Common Ground Church and Community is really about the church engaging a neighborhood, engaging a community, I am here with pastors who do this from around the country. And these are my covenant brothers. And I am so delighted that we could be here and have a conversation together. So I just want this to be a just roundtable discussion and for us to give input and chime into what does it mean for us to be the church in a neighborhood and in a community. As that is on a smaller level, but on a larger level, why is it that we're committed to this idea of urban church planting? This is an urban church plant cohort led by the esteemed Pastor John Teeter of Fountain of Life, Long Beach. We'll go around the room, just say where we're from, and then I'll begin to ask these questions around what it would mean for us to be committed to our urban church context.
I'm Harvey Kozar, pastor Hope City Covenant Church in Richmond, Kentucky.
Andrew Morrell, Real Community Covenant Church in Marion, Indiana.
Mike Thomas, pastor of Radiant Church, Seattle, Washington.
John Teeter, Fountain of Life Covenant Church and executive director of Fountain of Life Antioch in Long Beach, California.
David Washington, founder of Kingdom Covenant Church, senior pastor of Kingdom Covenant Church, Chicago, right here in Roseland.
Okay, all of us are churches, planting churches in an urban community. And for the most part, really all except for one, our churches would probably be considered multi-ethnic, right? It's almost like the buzzword around, is your church multi-ethnic? And what does that mean? What does that look like? But why are we committed to the urban community as a whole? Because when I was going through sort of this whole idea of developing a church, and when I said, we want to see people from all walks of life, but we're going to plant it here amongst the poor, amongst the people who are marginalized, and those who are under-resourced. People said, you can't have both. They said, you can't have a church with people from all walks of life and also plant your church here. You need to find the most diverse zip code, and usually that most diverse zip code is going to be in some suburban area, and plant your church there. But you all are planting churches and developing that type of those type of churches. How is it that you're able to get or to see this type of result in the midst of when people, and I know people said it to me, so I'm pretty sure people have said the same thing to you. How is it that you're able to get those type of results as far as people from all walks of life being committed to your churches?
For me in Marion, Marion is a very small city. We're talking about 30,000 people, small city, and there's a good mix of people, African American, Hispanic, white, Asian in Marion, Indian as well, but it's already kind of, and it's so small that that you have this and you see it regularly, right? And so one of the things that, well, for one, this is God's call, and I just said yes. I believe that God had already had this lined up because of the place that we're at, the space that we're at, my life. I didn't choose any of this, God chose me. I wish I could say that I had this set up, But the more I mature and the more I grow, the more I see actually God had this all set up the whole time, and all I had to do was say yes. And so God called this, not me. When I was a little boy, the church across the street, Apostolic Pentecostal church that I grew up in, the pastor prophesied, I was probably 10 years old, and said one day God is going to give us this building across the street. And that building across the street was the Marion Community Schools Administration building. And when that building caught fire, I'm a contractor. I drove past that building one day, and I said this would be the perfect place to plant a church. This building, 34,000 square feet, right in the center of the city. And so Central Marion, we called it Down Central growing up. And so when I said that, the next day I got a phone call about what I said being serious, and I said, yeah. And then being able to buy this building for $10. I couldn't put this together. But when this happened, God reminded me of a time when Pastor David Bichette, Elder Bichette, prophesied this when I was about 10 years old. And so when I remembered that, I went right over to him. He's still the pastor today. And I said, Elder Bichette, do you remember when you said this? Because I remember it. And I said, this was, you were prophesying, and you said this one day that God was going to give this to Christ Temple. Now I said, I'm a child, I'm a son of Christ Temple. And I said, he said sometimes when God gives you prophecy, you say it, and he says, and there may be other pieces that you don't have, but it's still going to be true.
Sure.
Wow.
And so, so I can't say that I did this. God called this. God's sovereignty. And I just simply said yes. And so, theologically, you read the scriptures, yes, I can sit here and say Jesus is incarnational. Jesus would have went to the hood, because I do believe that. That is true. But in my story, God called this. And I just said yes.
And isn't that how God creates?
Yeah.
He speaks it and it happens.
Yeah.
We try to come up with logic and strategies and methods and all of that for what we think things should be and how things should be, but God says something and it happens. We can't figure out how it's going to happen. We can't rationalize or strategize how it's going to happen. But if God says it, it's going to happen off of the power of Him just saying it. So and those who are interested in planting churches or feel called to plant churches, you got to get used to God saying things that don't make sense to you, and you got to get used to believing it and not trying to figure everything out, being okay with not having all of the answers. But no, that's what we move off of. And I love you saying calling, because that's what we move off of. My story is different because I did not want to plant a church. I had to be convinced that God was calling me. Once I was convinced that God was calling me to plant a church, I was all in. And I gave everything to learning about church planting, getting around church planters, going to conferences, reading books, so that I can learn what this new world was, not because I wanted to do it, but because I was called to do it, and I had no choice other than to do what I was called to do. But if there's no sense of calling, then it's not something that anyone should be doing.
And if I might be able to add, the fact that in Marion, my family was the first African Americans in Marion in the late 1700s. So this is a part of calling too. And when my family moved there, we couldn't live in the city. So they told my family, you can buy land outside of Marion. And so my ancestors bought some land from a farmer, and they sold them swampland to live on. So my family said, okay, let's drain it. And they drained it, and it became the most fertile soil in that area of Indiana. They built on it. And so this is a history. And then, so that my family were free, they were free blacks, coming from North Carolina, migrated to the north. They started the Underground Railroad because they realized what was happening to their brothers and sisters in the South. And then, so then you have a history of the Friends Church, the white churches. They partnered with my ancestors, Hills Chapel, AME Church. William Bishop Quinn was a church planter for the AME Church, and he came riding horseback in this area. And he came and he seen this Weaver community, and he said, we've got to, this has to be a place of the Underground Railroad here. This is what he did as a church planter. He rode around looking for free black settlers in the Midwest to set up shop, for blacks to lead the Underground Railroad.
My God.
To Luke 4, 18, 19. And so this is a part of the story of the very land, the very place and space in which I'm from. So I'm deeply attached to this place. And so again, but this goes back to God's call. And I just want to be faithful to what's already been laid before me. And then the idea of the partnership and being involved in the community, because it was a church, my ancestors were also Masons. And so the Masons did a community development work as a part of the church in Hills Chapel, where they built their own homes to take care of the veterans coming back from the Civil War who were hurt. And so this is the kind of stuff that was going on.
Like CCD or OG.
Yeah. So this is
rich history.
Yeah, this is rich history.
Profound.
And so you realize that this ain't really nothing new. Since the beginning, God has been seeking a remnant who would say yes to this kind of work.
It's powerful.
I think there's a real connection, John, to what Andrew is saying in Luke 4. So Jesus says, I've come for the poor. So first century Mediterranean culture, 5 character traits of poverty. So it's European is more justice oriented, right or wrong. Asian culture is more shame-based, honor or shame. So Mediterranean culture is Asian. So it's really an insider-outsider mentality. You either have shame or honor. So the 5 character traits of first century Mediterranean poverty, where you don't have enough money, you are the wrong race, you're a Gentile, you're the wrong gender, you're a woman, you're sick, you're a leper, or you actually have an immoral occupation, tax collector or prostitute. So Jesus comes on the scene and says, I've been sent, anointed by God, to bring good news to this marginalized community. And basically, I'm creating a new society for them in the center. If you're benefiting from the current culture, you can be a part of it, but you have to come our way and be a part of this. And literally from Luke 5 on, the whole rest of the book, who does he minister to? He ministers to the people who don't have enough money, the poor, the outsider, the woman, the tax collector. And you see that all the way, and then it really crescendos, I think, in Luke 14, where Jesus says, what is faith? It's loving people who can never pay you back.
Wow.
And I think our context is we see so much of church, and I think it's based on fear. So I agree with these pastors. We were called, but what's the call? The call is to embrace the suffering. Why is it that, John, if you took little John and the whole family to the Congo, you'd be a hero for raising your kids in the Congo. But if you put them in an inner city school, it's not as good as the suburban school. I thought you were a better parent, dude. What's happened? Well, you have to actually embrace the suffering if you're going to love people who can't pay you back. And so much of it is, I think people want both. I want to be an inner city minister, and I want everything I want to gain the world. You can't do both. So I think the call of God to us is you got to love people who can't pay you back, because I don't think we really take for granted where Jesus says, if you're loving someone who's just like you, has the same education, same background, same opportunities, even sinners do that. You don't need the Holy Spirit to do that.
Wow.
I think a lot of these really successful churches a lot of them are playing games. You don't need the Holy Spirit to run the kind of churches a lot of them are doing in the cities.
And that's sort of my point, right? Is these churches are running certain plays and using a certain playbook, and it seems almost to me as if we want reconciliation without justice.
Yep.
And yet you were told, I was told, that you can't do that kind of work and then expect people from every walk of life to walk with you. Talk a little bit about that. Like, I mean, who are you attracting? Who are you seeing coming to your churches amongst the folk who you are actually in the trenches with? Because we're doing that work, but then you're also seeing other folks who are attracted to what you're doing too. And what are you telling them?